Good morning, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm John Hubbard, and I lead the hospitality group in EMEA at Cushman and Wakefield. Many thanks for joining our webinar today, which focuses on the challenges facing the hospitality industry, specifically around reopening hotels, which have closed as a result of COVID-19. Some of you may know that Cushman & Wakefield has released a detailed recovery readiness guide for reopening the workplace, and we are sharing that best practice with our clients globally. Whilst that guide focuses on offices, we're also applying this to other real estate sectors such as retail and logistics. And my team in the hospitality group felt it important for us to similarly address the implications for the hospitality sector. I'm delighted to be joined here today by 4 panelists from very different backgrounds to share their own experiences and practical observations. Our panelists today are Stefan, who's CEO of Hong Kong-based Langham Hotel Group, Desmond Taljaard, Managing Director of London and Regional Hotels, Guy Phillips, who's Sector Head for Hotels for Santander in the UK, and Elias Hayek, who's Global Head of Hospitality and Leisure at lawyers Squire, Patton, Boggs. So we've got 2 investors stroke operators, 1 banker and 1 lawyer, and plenty to discuss this morning. Mindful of time, I'll make no further introductions, but the speaker bios are available for you if you click on the links next to the names and titles. Just so you know, I plan to quiz our panelists for around 45 minutes this morning, and then we should have time for about 10 to 15 minutes of audience Q&A, so please do submit questions using the question function on your screen. Jana from the home team will be picking out the best of these and posing them to you at the end. And we'll aim to respond to other questions, if practical, after the event. I want to try and keep the discussion today away from the standard operating metrics and commentary on investment activity, as they've been covered in other sessions. And I want to delve more into the strategic, financial, legal, and health considerations of reopening hotels. We're going to start with a short poll, and we've got 3 short polls today, one of which hopefully is up on the screen for you to see now. Please respond to that as we go through, and to the following ones when they come up. So with no further ado, I'd like to kick off with a question to Stefan, please, who's sitting in Hong Kong. Stefan, Langham have over 30 hotels globally on 4 continents, including several in China. So you really sort of put the forefront of the COVID crisis. Looking at your experience in China, how did you decide when to reopen hotels? What was your approach, and what lessons did you learn, or should I say still learning?
Yeah, thank you, John. I mean, decision based on a couple of different factors. The first one is obviously legally possible, because what happened in the shutdown, it was basically a lot of times not only necessarily triggered by economic or demand questions, but it was also triggered by actually government questions, national governments that basically said, listen, after the disaster in Wuhan and the Hubei province, where actually regional government was ousted by the central government, all those provinces and the people in charge were very keen on making sure they don't do too little. They sometimes went actually overboard and closed hotels very proactively, a lot of the venues, and quite strict. So that was one of the key considerations in terms of whether that province and that city then opens up and allows to be open. Then we were also encouraged, let's be clear, by the governments to actually go to and open up. The main challenge was therefore not so much in terms of timing, in terms of when you open it, but as strange as it might sound, the challenge would be then to make sure that your losses are not greater when you're operating than when you were closed. Because when the management teams are very clearly focused on cost containment as much as possible and looking for all kinds of ways of reducing the cost. When you go back and business comes in, how do you start? How do you ramp up appropriately your cost management? I think that's a challenge we see not only in China, that I also see in all the other regions where we will go through the reopening process and go back. And that's the tricky part of that, is that the business is not like a V that we were all hoping for, but it comes in very big amplitudes. Last weekend, for example, in the Golden Week, we had, occupancies that were almost back. Some of the resort hotels were at 100%. Some of the, city hotels were also in the high 60s, low 70s. And then a few days later, they're down to mid 20s and that's the main challenge. Don't ramp up back your cost levels to the maximum occupancies that will occur, but in terms of looking at how sure you actually start to earn money again.
Again, that presumably is more of a challenge for you being in the upper upscale luxury market than it would be if you're in the economy level.
Obviously, we have a lot more labor to deploy and needed for the service than if you're in the select service business. That's F&B. I mean, the whole restaurant, the whole food and beverage part, except for the events, the catering piece is even strong right now with the low occupancies here in Hong Kong. Are going out and using the operational restrictions put in place by the governments in terms of whether it's the maximum number of people and then the distance between the tables, obviously keep you suppressed from your earnings and from your revenue capabilities. And that's something forward that also is one of the challenges, to see you actually have the ability to make money with those restrictions in place.
Okay, and will this be quite different for your London asset when you get to reopen that? Because from the sound of it, with that nearly 100% occupancy, we've got a situation which doesn't sound that compatible with social distancing, which is more prevalent in Europe, it seems.
I think there are two different challenges on the occupancy of the rooms, where we don't expect to experience that we will be limited in terms of the number of rooms. You might restrict yourself in terms of how many rooms you open and how much you get operations because of the demand patterns, and in terms of what I said earlier, not to scale your full occupancy when you most of the time running at maybe 50% of staff. The challenge is more so on the F&B side, and the profitable catering and the events part is not happening for the foreseeable future. I cannot see that happening. We even in Hong Kong right now, with literally almost no cases, we have very restrictive measures in place in terms of how big weddings could be, what you can do, and all those kind of things. And therefore, the measures on the F&B side will be suppressing, as I said before, the ability to actually making money, and that will be the very delicate to deal with. And that's similar to China, Hong Kong, as well as in London, and all the other properties that we might open up in time to come.
Okay, thanks, Stefan. Desmond, if I could turn to you, London Regional, I think, have around 17,000 rooms in your portfolios around the UK, Europe, US, and Caribbean, ranging from select service to 5-star. How many of these have you had to close through the crisis, and do you now have reopening plans in place for all of these hotels? And I'm sort of interested in how those plans may vary by location or type of hotel.
Morning, John and everyone. People may be surprised that we have about 92 hotels, but surprisingly, we have over 20 open in the UK, and 4 of our 5 are open in the US. They're typically, in the US, I'll deal with quickly because it's an EMEA conference, but they tend to be open at key destinations, so they're occupied either by key workers, which is a broad classification in the US today, including cargo, air crew, National Guard, medical support, self-isolating for key worker family members. But you may be surprised that some of those are trading about 40% occupancy. And what we've learned there, and they're all full service, is that they are only viable at that 30 to 40% on a skeleton crew trading as a bedroom factory. Clearly, the distancing challenges mean that F&B is, for all intents and purposes, practically defunct. There are grab-and-go burgers in boxes or pizzas in boxes, and on the tablets of stone of things that we've learned in a crisis is that guests are grateful for a clean and safe bed and shower and towels, and don't appear to miss all the accoutrements of full service, as long as they have that sense of safety and security and a clean bed and a clean shower. But the challenge for us has been getting that skeleton crew down to the minimum to trade profitably. Profit being a definition of being short-term contribution to overheads, the point at which that will then become profitable at the NOI level, and indeed start to contribute to interest costs and other stakeholders, I think is one of our challenges. I'll come on to that in a minute. In the UK, only 2 types of hotels are open. 40 of our Atlas hotels are open either for key worker support or, interesting enough, for the impoverished or homeless charities are taken over at negligible cost to them, some of our operations as part of our kind of social contribution. The interesting thing about those units, which are primarily Holiday Inn Express and Hampton by Hilton units, is that we have taken that skeleton crew down to a point where you can break even at the GOP level at 12% occupancy. And I think that would be in the list of things we didn't know, great shibboleths of 6 months ago, where you'd have to trade at probably a multiple of that number before you'd expect to be able to turn at least a positive GOP. All those have been slayed by the fact that we can, for want of a better phrase, abandon any commitment to F&B. So if you're staying at Holiday Inn Express, the breakfast buffet is being shut down to the constraints on social distancing. Guests can opt to have a breakfast bag drop outside their room of a sealed paper bag containing a croissant, an orange juice, an apple juice, whatever. Unintended consequences are that guests are pleased and consider that good service. It actually costs us less to fulfill that than it does have the buffet service, approximately 30% of the cost that previously existed. So ironically, the necessity has created the invention of far more frugal means of delivering a guest expectation. What we found, of course, with select services is a lot quicker to reopen and retool. So some of our hotels have been yo-yo in structure. They've opened, shut down, open, shut down. One has done that 4 times in the last 7 weeks, according to the flexible needs and unpredictability of key worker requirements. But we've learned a lot. I wouldn't have wanted to trash the economy to go through these learning lessons, I hasten to say, or incur the massive impact on our medical system. But it does, I think, challenge some of our ways of thinking of how these hotels operate. When you're forced to figure out how low you can go in terms of skeletal head count to get a hotel open. The other one I didn't reference as well is our big bedroom factory in London, the 800-bedroom Strand Palace Hotel. That is adjacent to hospitals, key workers, army support on PPE distribution, etc. And that is also trading, probably fluctuates according to a very unpredictable need requirement of between 20 and 30%. But again, that is net profit of GOP versus being shut.
How are you pricing these then?
I can go on for several. Say it again.
I was saying, how are you pricing these then, Desmond? Because you're talking about the low occupancy levels, but from the sounds of it,
it's a good question. We are where there is an ability to price, and let's say putting aside the charitable contributions we're making, typically people are paying about 80% of an average ADR for this time of the year.
Okay, and just thinking of the hotels which you have got closed, what are the key triggers you're looking at now to consider when is the right time to reopen?
Well, they involve very difficult, delicate topics. Obviously, we haven't yet figured out the dovetailing of a rundown. I'm talking about UK now, particularly in Spain to some extent, where the ERTE is equivalent to the furlough. We don't yet know the model to finesse running down a furlough with bringing back the full teams of people that we need to run. Let's call it, for the non-resort hotels, let's call it the bedroom factory model. At the moment, we've got some skeletal staff who are keeping the hotels ticking over. If and to the extent that those occupancy gets up to, if we're lucky, 60 or 70% in the next 6 months, we are still only planning to bring back those skeletal crews, and F&B will be the last to come alongside us. I'm not the best cheerleader for the timing of any speed of recovery of F&B. I think it's going to be quite some time before we have clarity about how an experience is going to be delivered in bars and restaurants other than minimal breakfasting. I'd love to be proved wrong and the biggest idiot in the room, but I think there's still grave uncertainty. And so in terms of our reopening, John, there's a two-tier process. Bedroom factories we can get up running quite quickly until there's clarity on mobility, both internally into the UK or England and also internationally. That's going to impact our timing. We're gravely perturbed about the government's 2-week quarantine requirement and how that's going to decimate demand coming into key urban destinations. So I think London and Edinburgh and Manchester and Cardiff and anyone else who I've forgotten will be offended, but key international driven business is going to be a major laggard in the retooling and reopening of our units. Regionally, we're reasonably, whatever that means, reasonably sanguine that if the government not even encourages, but lets people do some travelling, there will be the urge for people to go visit internally. So regionally, we think we're reasonably confident. We're unclear what we're going to do, however, about F&B. So there are plans for our more luxury high-end service to deliver butler services either outdoors or to the rooms. But again, we're having to be very careful how we manage the quantum of those teams coming back. And again, if the furlough doesn't give some flexibility, then there's some danger, some real exposure, potential loss of great people if the hotels are open on the bedroom factory basis.
Okay, thanks. Let's move on if I can. Guy, as a banker, really interested in how you're supporting your customers through these current closures and probably particularly how the bank's approach may change when the hotels reopen.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. Morning all. Unfortunately, my internet connection probably isn't wide enough to deal with Disney Plus and everything else that's streaming through the house. Apologies that no one can see me at the moment. From our side...
You just don't want to be identified as a banker, do you, at the moment?
No, that's the other thing, of course. I'm just making sure I can hide in the ethers. But I think, yeah, it's a very testing time, clearly, and I think we are very keen and have been looking to provide as much support and as swiftly as we can. I think we, and generally the banking community, we sort of looked at it in various phases. So that sort of phase one was very much pre the actual lockdown, looking at how we could provide capital repayment holidays and covenant waivers for the original March IPD, so trying to get ahead of the requests, recognising that a small concession would clearly help at that point. I don't think a capital repayment is that big an ask, so we went down the route of a sort of blanket to give some form of support. I think the way we've been looking at it is the last time in global financial crisis, very much banks were part of the problem with the liquidity constraints and capital issues. Actually, now banks can be part of the solution. There is probably frustration, both in terms of as a banker and in the wider community, the speed at which we're able to get cash out to sort of SMEs and to support businesses. I think from Santander's perspective, we're a fairly small part of the total SME market, so we've been able to actually provide above our overall market share in terms of the government support measures with T-bills and CLIBBLs and bounce back. But particularly within hotels, we've looked to provide that 6-month window where it's just full covenant waivers and capital repayment holidays. That was sort of phase 1. Now phase 2 is what level of working capital facilities can we provide to support the cash burn. I think, as Desmond and Stefan have alluded to, the easier part of this equation is once you understand the wind down on sort of creditors that when the hotel was fully open in the first few months of the year, and you know what your closed costs are, you've constrained that down to a very small number. You've got the benefit of furlough, all the other deferral schemes that can be tapped in with the government. And if you have to look at another few months to sensitize what the closure period might look like, to really just say X per month, and then it's another 1 or 2 or 3 months thereafter to give you some comfort that whatever support we're providing will get people through the immediate term. The much greater challenge now is what will it look like at reopening? How does the ramp up look like? What does a new world with everything we've discussed here about delays to F&B, to social distancing? And I think that is a lot harder. So we recognize actually providing a working capital facility of a few million, whatever that may be, to support through the next 6 months is one thing. But as we get a little bit more insight into what we're going to need to do to reopen and how we look forward, the key for the banks will be making sure there is sufficient support for reopening. I think at the moment, most people's attention has been directly on, I have an immediate cash need. I think before furlough and being able to receive the rebate, clearly there was requirements to get support out there to plug the gap before getting any rebates. And now we're into the cycle, which is why I think this is obviously a very useful webinar, of saying what will that reopening look like. It doesn't take much in terms of a few percent shifting here and there on the P&L, and actually the level of working capital support that might be required could be significantly higher at reopening than it is through a closure period. So I think from our side...
Sorry, guys. I was just going to ask, as a banker, given that most borrowers are probably in technical default on loans at the moment, to what extent are you able, or in fact, do you wish to participate in that decision to reopen?
Yeah, very good question. So we'd like to be a part of that, because I think we'd like to be a partner. So where we're providing that support, we're sort of saying we are giving short-term immediate relief through covenant waivers. What we'd like to do is sit down with you and work out, once we have greater visibility as to what a covenant profile could look like going forward. We recognize there's going to be more debt within the businesses. It's going to be a time for us to be able to work through what this new world looks like. You know, you're looking a little bit like a new development / stabilization period, so you have to be realistic around resculpting amortization profiles and assessing the deals on a case-by-case basis. So the preference would certainly be to have the discussion and keep the dialogue open. And more, I think, is with the sheer volumes that we're dealing with, the earlier that we are in communication, the earlier that we're having the discussions around what it might look like, what that impact might be, the more we can position and get the support in place. I think one of the challenges we have found is when you have an event of this magnitude, which hits as hard and as fast for something like hospitality, a relatively large book and client base with a relatively small team, it's rare that every single one of your clients sort of turning around at the same time, needing support very, very quickly. So for us, it is now, having dealt with that initial response, the phase 2 is really how do we support now on a more medium to long-term horizon, and how can we be a partner through that? Because clearly there's benefit of saying if a longer opening actually could be, or sorry, a greater level of delay to opening could be more beneficial if you're only going to be opening at a point where there's a lot of other challenges and your level of cash burn is actually going to increase even more. So it's trying to work out where does that hotel sit in the segment, and especially with owners that might have several assets, it would make sense to discuss with them and say, okay, well, you would want to consolidate some of your demand into some of your assets as opposed to opening all of them and being at 10-15% occupancy. So we want to be a part of that, but clearly we're also wanting to give the flexibility to say, well, you guys need to be comfortable as to what that strategy will look like, and we want to be supportive and get the covenant profile, amortization profile, term extensions, or we are at the moment very much in anything maturing in 20. We are automatically looking to extend by 1 or 2 years. So the role at the moment is everything that we can do to support and provide additional time for additional consideration. That's how we're trying to position. And I think the earlier the engagement and the more that we are in the discussion as to what the new world will look like, the more we can help.
Okay, it sounds like your customers have got to keep talking to you and being open and therefore get your trust. I'd like to bring Elias in if I can. And part of your discussion there, Guy, about sort of which hotels, whether you open some or others, it probably sort of plays towards some of the brand discussions we've had. Elias, you're something of a poacher-turned gamekeeper, having moved from a major operator to a private practice. But I'm interested in the dynamics of that reopening decision, between the owner and the operator, especially when there's a brand involved. Who, in your experience, is making those decisions, and can either side, veto a decision, or are we being bound by the contracts which are in place?
Thanks, Tom, and good morning, everyone. It goes without saying that as far as the contracts are concerned, they provide, or the overwhelming majority of the standard hotel branded management agreements provide the operator with absolute discretion, or the greatest discretion, without owner involvement, to determine when to open or close the hotel partially or totally. That's the technical language. Practically, though, what we've seen in the past few months is there's a great deal of latitude being provided by the operators and a lot of exchange with our owners in relation to making determinations about closing, employee staffing requirements, and all the other elements that have come into closures. I think on a go-forward basis, I'd like to touch on what Guy was talking about. There is going to be a practical issue with opening, which will coincide with legal obligations for purposes of suppliers, ensuring that we actually have all of the perishables and consumables available all at one time. As Guy suggests, there's probably going to be an influx of hotels all coming on stream at one time. And historically, all of the attendance relationships that bring life to a hotel will all have to activate to meet all of those customers at one time. And I think there might be some difficulties there. I think the other issue is going to be seasonality. I know a lot of the owners that I deal with are quite concerned about being required to reopen a hotel in an environment that doesn't necessarily meet the seasonality of their hotels. And so a big part of what we noticed over the last 3 months is that there are two types of closures. There were closures that were knee-jerk reactions without much thinking as to what the parameters and the relationship between the parties will be, both in relation to the closure and the closure period, i.e., who's doing what during closure, what services will or will not be provided, and how do we deal with a pre-opening period or a reopening period, if you will, what conditions relate to that. And I'll get back to that point in a moment, because I think that's an important point, that threshold point. But then in addition is dealing with, okay, now that we've closed, do a process agreed between the brand and the asset owner as to who gets to make the call or what the preconditions for reopening will be, other than, of course, a green light from the government or other, sort of extraneous issues that would be more specific to the hotel are being documented in closure and reopening agreements with the brands. But the point I wanted to get back to, which was the point that at least one of our owners has raised, is there may very well be a cost associated with reopening very similar to the opening environment for a new build hotel. There may be a restaffing cost, the training cost, services that traditionally operators charge for. And so determining in advance whether or not there are any financial implications that relate to the pre-opening elements or the reopening elements has been important to some of our owners to document, so that everybody's clear and we don't all get caught off guard when we get to the point of discussing opening as to whether or not there are any additional costs or parameters that aren't necessarily agreed between the parties. So we've been documenting those things.
Okay, that brings quite nicely. I was going to ask the question how reopening after a 3-6 month gap differs from opening a new hotel, and you've started to touch upon that. I don't know whether Stefan or would like to sort of make a comment on that side. Do you see it different if you're closed for 4 or 5 months and reopen? Is that different to having a new hotel opening for you?
Well, technically, you have a crew in place, right? If they're on furlough, then they're still your employees. And I think the main opportunity in the challenge right now is that what Desmond has said earlier, that you now have the ability to actually question certain services, certain things that you want to bring back or not, even some relationships that you want to rethink. And that's the time that we need to use right now to rethink some of those setups. When it comes to reopening and obviously the challenge, the different furlough schemes in the different jurisdictions will then bring with it, in terms of whether you have to bring everybody back at once, you have to restructure if you don't have the workforce capacity. But it's not that you are in a ramp-up period like for a new opening. That's the major difference. The opportunity is obviously, and this is an exercise we're going through in every of our properties, is I think it's unavoidable that if for a certain period of time, certain things happen and certain things, I don't want to say costs mushroom, but there are certain things that you would now, and maybe there is an opportunity to reset some of those things in terms of whether you need 2 rows or just 1. And that's an opportunity that you do, but it's not about whether you have them new, but it's also about how you review them and then basically what amount of capacity do I bring back? What are the roles, not only related in terms of what you will operate right from the beginning, but also in what way you will operate in the future.
Okay, and Elias, from a legal point of view, then all these points about different staff requirements, third-party contracts, suppliers, etc. Is that a minefield for owners at the moment?
I guess that all depends on how they dealt with the closure. In the best case, you would have already pre-agreed all the third-party arrangements, and you should have, in fact, dealt with the cessation of activities in a formal way with all the different suppliers. That's quite a big feat for any individual hotel. There's hundreds of these agreements out there, whether they relate to goods suppliers, service suppliers, and more importantly, potentially the first is understanding inventory platforms and all of the OTAs and the like, and ensuring that you actually have continuity in those services. I think it's also important to ensure that they actually continue to operate. I mean, there unfortunately will be a lot of failures as the months go by. And someone between the owner and the operator needs to ensure continuity and integrity of all of these ancillary services and the agreements that relate to them, and ensuring that when everything comes online at one time, that there's, I don't want to, every owner views their asset as a priority, but there's a high unlikelihood that all owners will be serviced at once when everything comes back online. And so working that out in a supply chain arrangement and understanding how that will all transpire if and when you're ready to reopen is important to do now.
Desmond, you've identified, and Stefan, you've identified ways in which you might reduce your cost base and your ability to operate with sort of lower staffing levels and still generate a profit. Have you begun to quantify what the additional costs will be from sort of managing the requirements of social distancing, hygiene measures, etc., and how they're going to raise your operating costs going forward?
I think we've got a sense of scale, and it's probably mostly going to be, supplier consumables that's going to increase our cost base. Again, whilst I'm going to slightly dodge the question, because whilst we're a bedroom factory, we can target those costs specifically to check-in procedures and room cleanliness, whether it's spraying or hydrostatic cleaning or whatever, excuse the pun, solutions we're going to deliver to the bedroom factory. I think for us, the great unknown, and it may be perilous to confess to being unknown with a banker on the call, projections for the next 5 years. I'm struggling to project next week. The great unknown for us is how we're going to integrate, call it the non-bedroom factory components. And so if I think about the hotels that keep me awake most at night, there will be the resort destinations where someone still can't tell me whether you're allowed to go swimming in the pool with more than one other person at the same time, and how far away your deck chairs can be away from someone else. So resorts are real aside from the question whether could fly there or get there or stay there or get home within 2 weeks of flying away. The operational practicalities are difficult. We're lucky so far, I'm touching all the wood under this desk, believe me, that we don't have massive exposure to meetings, businesses, big meetings and conference hotels, because I struggle to understand how those are going to re-engineer the business until there's absolute clarity how people can converge on conference and meeting businesses again. But to answer your simple question, John, I think consumables obviously going to add something to our costs line. The whole F&B area, I think, is a bit of a unknown journey at the moment. I'm not sure even if we found a way to lay on really great dinners for guests, how many of them would want to sit on a table 3 meters away from anyone else with people in spacesuits serving them food or not. So I use hyperbole to make a point.
I said, I'd love to be there if I could, Desmond. It'd be nice to go out for a change.
Funny enough, there was talk about the pubs opening at some point, and I do think there will be people who will be tempted to go there, but I'm not sure what you do when you're allowed to go home again after you've been to the pub. Still unresolved social behaviours for us, but I do think one of the questions that sort of begged from Guy's comment just now about the bank's position is, what's the, we don't want to, I won't use the word force, but let's say encouraged, if not coerced, to open, to give the bankers and other financial stakeholders comfort that we are trying to get back up on our feet. That may be, cash negative versus didn't they using the furlough and in the cruelest circumstances biding our time until we can open as late as possible. We're confident there is a market and demand there. So I do see potential tensions going into the summer on timing of opening. I do think customers are going to be generally very tolerant of reduced service standards, and as long as they know they've got a clean room, as I said before, a safe check-in, and that we're defraying those costs appropriately, then I do think there's a basis for the business coming back. But F&B, meetings and resorts, I think we've still got a lot of work to do. I wouldn't pretend we've got a solution at all yet, really, John.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe I jump in here. Yes, maybe I jump in here a little bit, because obviously we're in a lockdown situation, right? And there you cannot imagine in terms of how it looks like if you are not in a situation anymore. I mean, for us, the biggest challenge here in Hong Kong is actually that the borders are closed. Okay, so I mean, and the borders basically closed, drive demand into the hotels, right? Where the F&B operations, and I've seen a lot of almost like just headline catching, like the dead of a banquet offering and so much. And I cannot affirm that. I mean, we're operating banquets, we're operating them in a different way. I share, and where I agree is obviously we haven't mastered the challenge of meetings, events, conferences, and that kind of catering, and whether that will come back. But the F&B operation as such changes, and are less the concerning part. The more concerning part is actually also not the demand, is a capacity in serving that demand, and how much are you allowed to actually take on as business. But what I've seen is and I think we're an industry that is crisis robust to a certain extent, and we have people that deal on it with unforeseen situations, and therefore I think we're maybe also one of the industries that is most agile when it comes to responding to unforeseen circumstances. That's what I see from my teams actually in terms of how they take on some of those challenges. The question regarding the investments, I see some investments that are needed, whether it's temperature checks, permanent installations of some of those, whether it's actually putting different coating on certain surfaces, looking at separating certain wet room amenities and doing. But as I said, from an overall bottom lines perspective, that's not our biggest worry. I mean, really, us, the question is, when will borders open up that travel and not only domestic demand drives the business? And the second part is when will restrictions on will be lifted? I mean, we have now here in Hong Kong, we have the pools and the gyms and the facilities open since the last weekend, which was a big prerequisite to get some staycation business going, because I have a bed in need another bed in a hotel. But if the facilities are open, if I can do something, then you trigger some demand. And we've had great putting staycation packages in place because people, and there I'm with you, John, people want to go out and they want to see something different and they want to meet. So it's literally very different for destination or each hotel working the stances that the local governments or the UK government or the other governments put in place. And we see, for example, Australia, our hotels in Australia, New Zealand will be the next ones where we can capture some local business, but also regional business. We believe firmly in those clusters, bubbles that and kind of like eligible countries that will start traveling within. While we were, the German government has now announced they will open up the borders.
I'm conscious now of time. I'm going to sort of ask one question to you all, and then I'll go for some questions from the audience, which Anna will read out. So if you haven't already posed any, then please do put them down, and we'll try and come to those. This is a sort of a bigger picture one. I mean, it may not seem like this to everyone who's listening, but yeah, those of us in the industry tend to have a pretty positive outlook on hospitality for after the crisis. We don't know exactly when that will be, but our long-term view is quite positive. But many, perhaps outside of the industry, don't share our optimism. What's the one thing about hospitality that gives you confidence about the future? You know, enough to tell a non-hotel investor why they should continue to be looking to hotels in the future. I don't know whether we haven't heard from Guy for a while, so to put him on the spot, what makes the bank confident about the sector as something to support long term?
Yeah, happy to jump in. I actually think one of Stefan's points there around the resilience of the market and the way hotels and hospitality adapts to change. I think some of the conversations and the challenges being faced and how they're being tackled now, I think other sectors would be wise to look into. So I feel when you have that backbone within being a service industry and looking at how best to deliver all your ultimate customer experience and the guest experience, that really helps, because fundamentally we are all very social beings. None of us like to be locked up in our makeshift offices at home. And whilst we have concerns, I feel with vaccines and the like of the medium term, there is still very good fundamentals around us as a human race wanting to socialize, travel, enjoy hospitality, the market and hotels, how they have evolved and adapted up to this point and will continue to. And when you look at the overall profit conversion of a hotel historically, we have had very healthy profit conversion. So the new normal might be that there's a higher cost base in the business, but we're not talking about a few percent on what you are converting. There is sort of some fact within how healthy the profit conversion has been. So I think the underlying fundamentals on a medium long term are very positive. And I think the way the whole industry has adapted to this point and the ultimate focus on the guest experience gives me a lot of confidence that it's still something that is very bankable into the future.
Thank you, Guy. Anyone else want to jump in on that?
Well, I still tell people it's the one thing that Amazon can't deliver. They can deliver live streaming, books, music, flowers, but they can't actually deliver you a travel experience. You have to get on some voyage and go and do that yourself. So I think that I agree with Guy that that's a fundamental trait of humanity, and it's also been consistently the largest growing industry for the last 20 years globally. an extremely negative view might take position that there's a new normal where international travel might be severely curtailed. But even if that were the case, people will travel internally and domestically. I have to say that's a very extreme dystopian view one would have to take. But I'd rather be, if I'm going to be in real estate, I'd rather be today in a hotel sector than I would be in a retail or an office. We may not have offices anymore. Who knows of the scale that we've gotten used to. Maybe logistics, because someone still needs to deliver the books and flowers. But I think we need to be careful not to be too paranoid and defensive about the prospects for the industry, because it's been a continuous growth sector, and the growing middle class, there's going to be something for them to do. So I remain long-term confident, but I'm very
positivity.
Very hesitant about making predictions about when the long-term begins.
Yeah, I agree. And the Asian aspect of growth is something that we shouldn't estimate. There are still a lot more people that have the desire to travel and growing.
Fantastic. Shall I go across? Jana, do you have a question from the audience you'd like to pose?
Thank you, John. Yes, we have plenty of questions. I hope you can all hear me well. So far, we've had great audience engagement with various interesting topics indeed. However, the most frequently asked questions are around the topic of course, forecasting and pace of recovery. So the first question is, given the difficulty of forecasting the pace of recovery, how are banks approaching the issue of valuation, which fundamentally underpins the decision to lend, invest, and construct? So this particular question has been directed, no surprise to Guy, and towards you, John.
Yeah, I'll jump in first, John, on the basis direct to the bank. So Santander actually came out mid-March to say there is a complete freeze and moratorium on valuations up until the end of September. We recognise at the moment, and that's both in terms of fresh valuations, we recognise with market uncertainty, we are here to support and providing LTV covenant waivers. There's very little point in getting a valuation if you're going to be acting upon it, and that's not what we're looking to do. So it's an additional cost to the business at the moment, and none of us really know from a bank's perspective. So from a short term, we've effectively just said we know what the value was pre. Very difficult to know exactly what the value is going to be post, and I echo the comments around when does the long term or the medium term or even the short term. There's so much uncertainty, and none of us know. So I think, going back to my comments, the more we can help and be a partner, and the more we can look at all sorts of different forecasts and scratch our heads together as to work out what we think could be the art of the possible and reasonable, just helps with us being able to help the rest of the industry and help all operators with putting some of those forecasts together. John, what about you and your thoughts?
I didn't think I was going to have to answer questions, given I was moderating. I think what we are seeing from the banks, I think you're absolutely right that evaluation is a point in time, and when the point in time is so uncertain, it doesn't help enormously to ask the question unless there's a strong purpose. So the most of the focus has been around the cash flow, looking at the projections going forward and looking at scenarios. We don't know exactly what it would be, but there's always a place to sensitize and to look at different scenarios based upon recovery, how we might see the values recovering in the future, where they're dependent either directly on operating performance or indirectly through the rents and support of the rents. That's critical at the moment. We've not, from market evidence, we've not seen much adjustment across any sectors on yields at the moment, largely because there haven't been a lot of transactions going through. And so most of the adjustments will come through on looking at the projections over the next 2 years and a build up to a more stabilized level of business. And I think it's fair to say that pricing will certainly have come off. But it won't. Vendors won't be selling unless there's a degree of distress. So it's wait and see, but it is also a real refocus onto the fundamentals of the property. And what you find in stronger times is that the delta between the good and the secondary gets squeezed, and in times like this, the good remains good and attractive long term, and the secondary tends to get reassessed in risk terms. Desmond, you look like you want to add to that.
No, I just wondered if it all fails, John, you go into politics. I was going to say there's a great slide that shows valuations after, apparently the 2008's now got an acronym called the GFC, which I never knew, the Global Financial Crisis. We all refer to it as though it's something we're very familiar with. But there's some great slides of valuation of the GFC that actually the low point of hotel real estate was about, I think it was Q1 2010. Before it got back to where it was pre-GFC, which is about 2 years later. But what the trend shows is that we were, all of us, wrong for most of the time. But to endorse your point, the good shows through eventually. So the challenge is going to be for all the financial stakeholders and investors through this. I don't know what we'll call what three-letter acronym. Maybe you call the CCC. You can guess what the first one, but the two stand for the other two: Corona crisis. Trump will tell you what the first C stands for. When we go through this process, let's hope in 3 years' time we can look back and refer to this webinar and say that the new normal was sustainable normal, and that all the hysteria and Corporal Jones moments that we went through at this point were luckily just those short-term experiences and impacts and shocks. I'm a fundamental believer in this sector. I wouldn't have wasted so many years, hopefully, if I didn't believe in it. My uncertainty, I think domestically hotels will endure. The uncertainty is how much constraint on international travel is going to delay that rebound, because I agree with Stefan, there is a built-up pressure to come back and see the world and enjoy the world and experience the world. So how does that relate to how you do your job with your primary clients that on a valuation side, lenders, is I think, remind me to take that slide every time I come and meet with either of you guys, to say there is, we will all be wrong. We will overestimate the boom and underestimate the trough, and values incorrectly are incorrect at both those times. But I'm hopeful that the banks understand that the valuations that they go through at the moment are to some extent irrelevant. What is important, I think you mentioned this, John, is that we focus on what sustainable cash flow is going to be coming out of this turbulence.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm conscious we're going to have to wrap up shortly, but John, is there a quick question, one final one we can do before we wrap up?
Certainly, and I think I would direct that question to Stefan in particular. How will guest behavior and requests evolve over time, and how will you do with it?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the question.
You cut out a little bit there, Donna.
Okay, I'll just repeat it once again. How will guest behavior and requests evolve over time, and how will you deal with it?
Yeah, I think, look, especially in the luxuries, I don't like to talk about those cleanliness aspects. That's something that I think is a prerequisite in our industry, but they're provide an environment where guests feel safe to procure the services. is one thing that will be for the first time be very, very important. And then I don't think that the human animal will change so much in that respect. I think what we loved before the crisis, we love after the crisis, more a matter of how we will be need to adapt of delivering it. So I don't think that there is much in terms of the guest behavior, but maybe in the way we have to satisfy the guest. That's the way I would phrase it.
Okay, I think we're going to have to wrap it up there. I'd just like to thank all the panelists for their contributions today. I think we probably underestimated the time we should spend on this. We could easily have chatted for two or 3 hours. So maybe we'll need to come back with a follow-up as we see the crisis develop over the next few months. So seems to be optimism long term, which I think is really important. I think there's opportunity for everyone to change and improve what we're doing in the shorter term as well. And you know, there's really going to be some tough times for all parties, for the hospitality workers, for the owners, the investors, the bankers, as we go through. But I'm confident, having been in the industry for 30 years, that we will come out. And I think these long-term trends will certainly show through. So we'll keep faith. Thank you, everyone, today, and look forward to speaking again in the future.
Thank you.
Thanks all.